June the 3rd, to protest the Swedish government's attack on Julian Assange. Despite the fact that they don't have any charges, they want to continue to harass Julian Assange. And what we're saying is that it's the Swedish government, really, that should be put on trial along with the United States government for supporting war, for profiteering off of military equipment that has been used in illegal wars around the world. And the clearest and most immediate sign of that is the Swedish government supplying millions of dollars of equipment to Saudi Arabia, which was engaged in an illegal criminal war on the people of Yemen. And that is a war crime, genocidal war crime, the bombing of the people of Yemen by the United States supplied jets from Saudi Arabia, by the United States, which has been actively supporting the U.S. war crimes in Yemen, and refueling jets. The United States military have been refueling jets that are then bombing in Yemen. These are war crimes that the governments don't want to talk about. So what we are saying is that the real criminals are not Julian Assange, are not Chelsea Manning, are not the whistleblower Snowden, but those governments that have engaged in covering up this. And what we are saying is the espionage charges against Julian Assange are a threat to all journalists, throughout the world, because if they can arrest and jail journalists who are releasing information about governments, about corporations, they want to silence any exposure of the real war criminals. And that's really what's going on. And we believe that the attack on Julian Assange is another example of the dangerous threat to journalists and free speech of people around the world. The crimes that were exposed by Julian Assange, what were they? Well, one of them was in the Iraq War, how U.S. troops were murdering journalists, were murdering people, murdering civilians without any justification. It was a war crime, and guess what? The United States government hasn't prosecuted any of the people that were engaged in those war crimes. They haven't prosecuted the war criminals, really, who were engaged in it, because the United States government, whether it's Democrat or Republican, are engaged in these war crimes. It was war crimes that happened under Bush, there are war crimes that happened under Obama, and there are war crimes that are happening today under Trump. Trump has disregarded, actually, a majority vote of the Senate and the Congress against more military weapons to Saudi Arabia, which are being used directly on the people of Yemen. Yet Trump is continuing to support this destruction and genocide against the people of Yemen. So what we're saying is the campaign to free Julian Assange is also a campaign to expose the crimes that have been revealed in WikiLeaks, which the government wants to shut down. These crimes that by the government around WikiLeaks also expose the Clinton administration and Hillary Clinton. Hillary was involved as Secretary of State in overturning the government of Guatemala and putting up these generals. Now, one of the criminal things about really the propaganda blitz in this country is when they talk about immigrants and migrants coming to the United States, they never talk about what the United States did in overthrowing the government of Guatemala. Isn't that strange? The United States was involved in overthrowing the government of Guatemala, allowing repression of the people of Guatemala. There was just a strike of teachers and medical workers. They never talk about the role of the United States in actually bringing about a massive crisis, humanitarian crisis, driving the people of Guatemala, of El Salvador, out of their countries towards the border. I mean, we, the United States government, not we, the United States government have been involved in massacres, have been involved in killing people in Central America and in Mexico. The drug war in Mexico is the United States involvement. There are U.S. military units in Mexico. Now we blame the Mexicans. This criminal government, the Trump government, who the Democrats do not want to impeach, is involved in crimes against humanity. Imagine that. Mexico is abusing the United States. Mexico is the abuser. I mean, think about that. U.S. capitalist companies, the multinationals, have been involved in privatizing Mexico, stealing the land from the farm workers, ejidos, privatizing the telecom. And the fact of the matter is, the United States government, along with the Swedish government, want Julian Assange jailed. They would like him killed. And we are concerned that right now, in the prison that he is in Britain, he may be being ejected with drugs, as they have done to other people, to destroy him. We don't know what the condition of Julian Assange is. His lawyers, his family are very concerned about that. And we believe that his life is under threat. And that's another reason we're here today. But we know that the Swedish government, along with the U.S. government, do not really care about humanity. They don't care about lives. They're interested in profiteering. They're interested in selling more military equipment. That's what these governments are about. And we're going to stand here and demand freedom for Julian Assange. The International Federation of Journalists, other unions around the world, his own union, MEEA, in Australia, are supporting him. He's been a member of the Journalists Union since 2011. He was a member of the Journalists Union. He is a journalist, but whether he's a journalist or not, he should not be prosecuted. He should not be imprisoned. And this campaign by capitalist governments, the UK government, the Swedish government, the American government, and the Ecuadorian government to get rid of Julian Assange is that they want to continue the cover-up of Julian Assange. So we're also going to have another rally on June the 12th when the U.S. government will be having a hearing in Britain to extradite him to the United States. I think that the government of the United States is a government of war criminals. It's a government of racists, of people who support Nazis. Why is the U.S. government and the Israeli government arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine? Why are they sending weapons around the world? That's what we're talking about. Those are the real issues that we're addressing here. And we're saying that the Swedish government needs to be put on trial. The war criminals that have supplied weapons to bomb people around the world have to be put on trial. Those are the real war criminals. And we call on people around the world to demand the Swedish government drop any charges, drop the demand for extradition to Sweden, and that there be an exposure of the real role of the Swedish government in this cover-up, really a conspiracy to go after Julian Assange. Okay.
You want to hold this, Steve? Julian Assange is an editor, he's a publisher, and he's languishing in prison right now in what's called the Guantanamo of the UK, because he succeeded in finding a way to expose the dark side of this US empire. Now, the British have been quite enthusiastic about extraditing Assange to the United States to face Espionage Act charges. But even in their enthusiasm, they have not been unwilling to follow a few basic judicial niceties, like putting off last week's court date because Assange was so ill that he could not make it to the court. He couldn't even make it by a video link. But it does appear that next week, even if he's still ill and incoherent as he has been, it is expected that they will be going to carry out their judicial process within the medical wing of Belmarsh Prison. Now, the Swedes, on the other hand, have been a little more crass about this. Julian Assange was not able to confer with his lawyer regarding the court procedures today. And not only that, but the legal documents for this court procedure have not even been translated into English and will not be translated until Monday of next week. So he hasn't had a chance to see anything, even in his medical state. So they show up trying to get a European arrest warrant for Julian Assange today, and it turns out that the judicial authorities and the prosecutors in Sweden are so incompetent that they had absolutely no idea that you cannot get an arrest warrant for somebody who is being investigated for a crime. Instead, you have to get a European warrant for investigation, and what that would mean is that they would have to go to Britain in order to interview Assange about this investigation, which leaves us back where we were 8 years ago. So, I think that's all I need to say right now. Thank you.
Yes. My name is Gloria Lariva. On behalf of the Answer Coalition, I wish to express our fullest solidarity, as I know that many others feel, for Julian Assange, who has so courageously for years used through the means of WikiLeaks the exposure of U.S. war crimes, British war crimes, and anything that has harmed the people of the world. His documents have been demonized. He has been demonized while he was sequestered basically in the Ecuadorian embassy after President Lenín Moreno came in. He has been silenced for months. If he had been able to speak as he had before and issue documents as he had before, the world would know so much more of what the U.S. is doing to carry out war, sanctions, occupation. And right now, Trump is in London. There's expected to be hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating tomorrow. I hope that among the demands against Trump will be the demand for freedom for Julian Assange. I'm confident that will happen, but it will take the efforts of people of the United States and people of the world who are fighting for the truth against U.S. imperialism, to expose what the U.S. is doing, regardless of what is happening to Assange. He has given us enough ammunition of the truth to be able to continue exposing U.S. war crimes. But it's an outrage. As Chelsea Manning has also been demonized, has been thrown in jail again and again for refusing to cooperate with a fishing expedition, an attempt to silence more people by the grand jury. And so we have to stay strong, say no to U.S. war, no sanctions, no coup. The U.S. media, it's not only that Assange has been silenced and he's facing life in prison through trumped up charges against the journalists, charges against the truth, but the U.S. media is carrying out a fierce war against the people of Venezuela in trying to portray a picture of Venezuela as ungovernable in such a state of chaos that the U.S. must intervene through war and sanctions that are actually killing the people of Venezuela. So solidarity with Julian Assange. Free him now.
Free Julian Assange.
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 Free Julian Assange. So we're here today in front of the Swedish consulate in San Francisco, and we're demanding that Sweden get your bloody hands off Julian Assange. The Swedish government has a long record of talking about human rights, but in reality selling weapons to continue illegal wars around the world. So the hypocrisy of the Swedish government is unbound. This Swedish government has been conspiring with the United States to arrest Julian Assange, to send him back to the United States, to shut down WikiLeaks. The Swedish government has spent millions of dollars in so-called investigation of Julian Assange. How about investigating their own war criminals? That's what I'd like to see. There are war criminals in Sweden who are profiteering for war against the people of the world by illegally selling weapons to the government of Saudi Arabia, to selling weapons to governments all over the world that are engaged in war crimes. And this is why they don't like WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks exposed the war crimes that were going on around the world. It exposed the illegality of the United States government. And the fact of the matter is, the United States government, which was involved in war crimes in Iraq, which were exposed by WikiLeaks, those war crimes have continued not to be prosecuted. The real people who were engaged in war crimes that were exposed by WikiLeaks, how come there's no prosecution? In fact, the Trump administration now says they want to pardon U.S. military officials who actually murdered people. and they have evidence of the murders. And the U.S. government says that they should, Trump says that they should not be prosecuted. He wants to pardon them. He said it was very difficult in war. Well, if you're in criminal wars, yeah, you're going to do criminal things. This is the reality. And this Swedish government is aware of these war crimes. This Swedish government is complicit in covering up the war crimes. And in fact, they're in collusion with the U.S. government and the British government to silence Julian Assange, to kill Julian Assange. That's what we're talking about. Murder of Julian Assange, murder of Chelsea Manning. That's what they'd really like to do. And that's why U.S. Capitol's politicians have called for him to be put on trial and murdered. That's the real terrorism. The truth tellers, the people who tell the truth about the war crimes, they're the ones that get blamed. They're the ones that these governments say are criminals. We say exactly the opposite. We say the Swedish government here in the consulate and the Swedish government officials should start putting their own officials on trial for war crimes, for selling weapons to people all over the world who engaged in war crimes. The war crimes in Yemen that are going on have been supplied by the Swedish government. They have a big military weapons industry. They are profiting from selling weapons to countries that are committing war crimes. Why aren't they in trial? Instead, they're going after Julian Assange, who has exposed it through WikiLeaks. And we say enough is enough. Put the real war criminals on trial. The Swedish government has framed up Julian Assange. They've spent millions of dollars in a so-called rape investigation that they can't show. And actually, the real criminals are not being put on trial. That's what we're saying. The Swedish government and officials in the Swedish government, in collusion with executives of Sweden, have been selling weapons to countries engaged in war crimes. Why is there no trial of those? Why have they been silent about those? The fact of the matter is they are covering up war crimes. That's why they're going after WikiLeaks. And we say this is an attack on journalists everywhere. The International Federation of Journalists have called for his freedom. The Australian Journalist Union have called for his freedom. His freedom is being demanded by people all over the world because he's a truth seeker, because WikiLeaks has exposed these war crimes. And that's why they're after Chelsea Manning. That's why she's in jail right now in a frame-up of a grand jury. She's in jail to punish her because she's told the truth about U.S. crimes. And of course, who in the government and who are the leading Democrats? Are they talking about Julian Assange? They're saying, no, he should be jailed. He's a threat to the United States. The biggest threat to the United States are the real war criminals that run these governments. That's the biggest threat to the United States and the people of the world. They're spending trillions on war, and people are dying in San Francisco on the street. People can't get health care. People can't get housing in San Francisco. Yet they say that they're supporting the people. No, they do not represent people. They represent the war profiteers. The Saudi Arabian government and the prince in Saudi Arabia, MEB, who was involved in murder of a journalist. What do they say about him? They're negotiating with him. They're giving him money. They're giving him weapons. This is the real role of the United States. That was a crime. And who's going on trial for that? Nobody is going on trial for that because the U.S. government is protecting Saudi Arabia. The U.S. government is giving them weapons to continue their illegal war in Yemen, their criminal war. I mean, what they're doing now in Yemen with the support of the United States, that is a war crime. Bombing schools, bombing water plants, destroying the infrastructure in Yemen. That's a war crime. Are they being charged with war crimes?
what they're trying to do is constitute investigative journalism, the use of secret documents, the exposure of secret documents coming from whistleblowers as a process of spying, as espionage. And as espionage, they want to put him in jail, make a precedent, legal precedent, so that they'll scare the head dickens out of any other journalist who might consider using secret documents to expose what our governments are doing. This is far worse than what the UK has. The UK has an Official Secrets Act where they can tell a publishing outlet that
something they're about to publish is an official secret. They issue a D notice, and then that publishing outlet has to stop the publication. This is far worse. If a journalist gets a hold of documents, maybe he tries to report on it, this person, any precedent that's developed out of Julian Assange may lead to journalists being put in jail. This will shut down investigative reporting altogether. All right, we won't know anything about what our governments are doing in secret. This is extremely dangerous. All right, we have a Bill of Rights in this country, which is absolutely a gem, even if it's fallen in the breach many times. But it was unique in the world when it was first developed, and it's almost unique in the world today. We have to protect it. We have lost it on many fronts. We cannot allow them to constitute journalism, reporting on what our governments are doing as espionage under the Espionage Act.
So we're here today in front of the Swedish consulate. It's Monday, June the 3rd. Today there was a hearing in the United Kingdom where the Swedish government illegally was trying to go after Julian Assange, trying to call for his extradition from the UK to Sweden. Why are these governments spending so much effort to extradite Julian Assange? What are they afraid of? Is Julian Assange such a great threat to them? Is Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning such a great threat to them? The reality is, because they released information about war crimes of the United States, about war crimes of Britain, about war crimes of Sweden, that's why they're after Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. They're afraid of the truth. They're afraid of people understanding the truth. WikiLeaks has played an important role in exposing the role of these capitalist governments, these imperialist governments, in war crimes around the world. And that's why they want to shut them down. They don't want the American people to know. They don't want the American people to know the facts about their illegal activity. When they were involved in the overthrow of the Guatemalan government, they don't want people to know about that. They want to keep that a secret. I mean, when they blame the immigrants, the migrants for coming to the United States was directly responsible for creating the conditions that forced these people off their land, that forced them to flee Guatemala and El Salvador. It was the war crimes of the United States. It was intervention in these countries that brought that calamity. And the same with Iraq, the illegal war, the criminal war of the United States that we have spent trillions on, have forced millions of people, 6 million people, to leave Iraq. The war in Syria was illegal bombing by the United States. Saudi Arabia and Turkey have forced millions of people off their homes to flee. This is the greatest calamity since the Second World War. And it wasn't an accident, it wasn't a natural disaster. It was the war crimes of the United States. It was the war crimes of Britain. It was the war crimes of Sweden. That is really what's going on. And that's why they want him in jail or dead. And we are very concerned about his health now in the prison in Britain, because he may be given drugs. We don't trust the government of Sweden or the government of Britain to protect him. They're attacking him. Free Julian Assange.
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 Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. You know, there have been certain precedents set, as the brother said before, about a journalist being charged with espionage for exposing war crimes, for acting as a journalist. There are some in the media who shamelessly are saying that he's not a journalist, but in fact, he is, and yet the issue of journalism has to take on a whole new definition. When the U.S. media, on behalf of imperialism, the spokespeople for the Pentagon, the voice of the Pentagon, of the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Fox, and National Public Radio, when they are one monolithic voice for war against Syria, previously in Libya, against Iraq, and now against Venezuela, when they have justified and carried out the media lies on behalf of U.S. foreign policy, then it's up to the people to be the journalists. It's up to the people to expose the truth. Whether you have a journalism degree, or you get paid for it, or you're doing it pro bono, whatever it is, if you are exposing the truth as an activist, you have a right to protection and not to be charged with national security crimes of espionage. It's a lie. So we say free Julian Assange, free Chelsea Manning, no U.S. war, no sanctions, no occupation of any country in the world. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange. Oops. It's fine. I just want to mention to anyone who's listening or hasn't already done this that there's a really good example of why they're afraid of Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, which is the collateral murder video, which you can find online just by Googling those words, and you see the callousness and the violence of the U.S. Army in Iraq. And that was one of the many things that Chelsea Manning gave or sent to WikiLeaks. And having information like that, seeing it in person as it's happening, the video takes place from the helicopters themselves that are killing the people on the ground in Iraq who are doing nothing. And as many of you know who are listening here, 2 Reuters photographers were killed, but many children were hurt, and they counted cameras as weapons, and they begged to be able to shoot and kill. I just want to point that out to people who haven't already seen it. The coldness of it never leaves you.
I wonder if we should all take a picture together while there's more people here, just to have for the record and everyone gathered together.
Well,
To take a picture together, yeah. In front of the building here, we should take a picture. Does anybody have a phone?
yeah,
A phone that takes picture? Come on, get closer, everybody. Let's all get closer.
okay.
Let's all get closer if we can.
Well, yeah, that's good. Okay.
Make sure we're all seeing here. Anybody want to do these signs?
So the other thing that needs to be addressed right here in San Francisco is the attack on the home and the office of Brian Carmody, who is a journalist. And the police department was illegally got some judges to issue an arrest warrant for Brian Carmody, saying that he was criminally conspiring to release documents from the police department about the death of Jeff Adachi. And the fact that they would violate the California Shield Law is another example of who's running our government. This isn't Trump. This is London Breed. This is San Francisco. This is the Democratic Party-controlled San Francisco. So here you have an illegal action by the police department. Are any police being arrested for illegally harassing? I mean, you know, they go after a journalist, a freelance journalist, but no police are arrested. And they violate the California Shield Act. Why haven't these police that did that been arrested?
Because they're cops.
Well, that's what it is. There's a double standard. If you're a cop, if you're a criminal who is really doing illegal activity, you don't get arrested. So this arrest in San Francisco of Brian Carmody and the failure of the authorities to arrest the police who did that shows a double standard. You know, if you're defending people, if you're fighting for the people, you are arrested. If you're trying to release information, as Brian Carmody was, you're in jeopardy. So that's why the case of Julian Assange is not just about Julian Assange. It's about the freedom of all journalists. And all our unions, including the CWA, including the Pacific Media Workers Union, should defend him. The Pacifica Foundation has called for the freedom of Julian Assange. And KPFA should demand that Julian Assange be free. The station should have a statement on their website, Free Julian Assange, because it's not just about Julian Assange, it's about all journalists.
It's our right to know.
It's our right to know, and if they get away with pursuing these espionage charges against Julian Assange, they could be arresting anybody. Any journalist that reports on something could be arrested, including Washington Post, including the New York Times. That's why the major corporate media now are starting to wake up that if this espionage law is successfully used against Julian Assange, it threatens all their free speech, all journalists, all writers. And this is something that we have to defend against. We have to demand that Julian Assange be free. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Free-
Reporting war crimes is not a crime.
Reporting war crimes is not a crime. Reporting war crimes is not a crime. Free Julian Assange.
Free Chelsea. Free Chelsea Manning.
Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. And we have to say here in front of the Swedish consulate in San Francisco that they are conspiring with the United States government. They're conspiring with the British government to shut Julian Assange down. And the Swedish government itself hasn't been involved in war crimes. The Swedish government has supplied weapons to governments all around the world who've been involved in war crimes, of killing their civilian population, of illegally bombing them. If the Swedish government is concerned about crimes, why don't they start with the government officials and the owners of these armament companies and going after them? That's what they should be doing. Instead, they're spending millions of dollars prosecuting Julian Assange. I mean, they don't have to look far. Look in their own country to the criminals who illegally sold weapons to countries that are committing war crimes. This Swedish government is hypocritical, they're duplicitous, they're liars, because the real criminals are in the Swedish government, are in the Swedish armaments industry that have spent weapons.
Nobel, the Peace Prize.
Well, Nobel, yeah, that's true.
That's what he
So what we're saying here is that the real criminals are not being prosecuted. Assange and Chelsea Manning have exposed the real war criminals, and that's why they're trying to shut him down. That's why they're trying to arrest him. That's why they have arrested Assange. That's why they would like to arrest other whistleblowers and journalists, because they want to shut down the truth. And we're saying we're not going to shut down the truth.
Sweden has investigated for 9 years and not come up with anything.
Yeah, Sweden has been investigating Julian Assange for 9 years. Now think about the money and resources that the Swedish government has been involved in investigating Julian Assange for an alleged rape case, and they have no real evidence. Yet they want to extradite him.
For 9 years.
Now, if they're going to spend that time in investigating Julian Assange, what is this investigation by the Swedish government really about? Why have they spent all this money and resources trying to investigate Julian Assange? What it's about is shutting down the truth. The Swedish government is conspiring with the U.S. government to shut down the truth that has been exposed in WikiLeaks. That's what this is all about. And they allow it. The Swedish government should be held accountable itself, along with the U.S. government and the British government, for crimes against the people of the world. That's what we're talking about. And the hypocrisy, the duplicity of the Swedish government, talking about human rights. What human rights when they're making millions and millions of dollars selling weapons illegally to bomb the people of the world? That's the reality of the Swedish government. The hypocrisy, the crimes against the people of the world that they want to cover up. That's why they want to shut down WikiLeaks. That's why they want to shut down Julian Assange and other whistleblowers. They're helping the U.S. government cover up the crimes. Trump is not by himself. Trump is in Britain today talking about the Mexican people have abused the United States. Can you imagine that? This metropolis here, these multimillionaires and billionaires have been abusing the Mexican people. How dare him? The United States has been involved in colonizing Mexico. They stole the land. They stole the ejidos. They've stolen the nationalized property of Mexico. And he's talking about the United States being abused by Mexico? Talk about fake news. Talk about a fake reality. I mean, it's total hypocrisy. The U.S. imperialist government has been abusing people all over the world, and particularly in Latin America and Central America. And they talk about abusers? I mean, that's like the husband who beats his wife and said that his wife caused it. That's what we're talking about, abusers. The United States and the Swedish government have been involved in abusing the people of the world. They've been profiteering from the sale of weapons all over the world illegally. And they should be held accountable. They should be put on trial. That's why we're in the Swedish consulate of San Francisco today, to get the truth out about Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial.
Put the
Swedish war criminals
on trial.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial.
Put the Swedish war criminals on trial. So we're here today. Do anyone else would like to speak about these issues? We're also going to be rallying on June the 12th. On June the 12th, the United States is going to be at a hearing in London to extradite Julian Assange. So we're urging journalists, activists, people who want to fight for free speech, to come to the federal building on June the 12th and at 4 p.m. and join us again in demanding the freedom of Julian Assange, of Chelsea Manning. We urge you to come. We urge all unions to get involved. The labor movement needs to get involved in this. The San Francisco Labor Council passed a resolution calling for defense of Julian Assange. They said that the real war criminals are the United States government that has been involved in war crimes in Iraq and other countries. And we have to get the labor movement involved, because this issue of free speech, freedom, and democracy will only be defended by action. We cannot rely on the Democrats. There was just a Democratic convention here in San Francisco, California Democratic Convention. Was one word mentioned about Julian Assange? No. Was one word mentioned about Julian Assange by the convention of the Democratic Party in California? Hell no, because Nancy Pelosi, because Dianne Feinstein, because these senators, Kamala Harris, support the United States extradition of Julian Assange. These people support it. So how can you support people who want to extradite Julian Assange? The silence of Nancy Pelosi, the silence of Dianne Feinstein, of Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris, they are covering up the role of Trump, which is trying to extradite Julian Assange, because they themselves have voted for war expenditures, on illegal wars. They voted trillions for illegal wars around the world to support the United States. Are they supporting the United States by supporting more military spending? I mean, do you believe that? Do you believe that the trillions of dollars the United States bombing Iraq, destroying that country, has helped the United States? Has that helped people around the world? Hell no. That's encouraged the death and destruction of people in their societies. The United States is spending money on wars around the world, as is Sweden, by giving weapons to these governments. These are the people that should be held responsible for war crimes. Not a whistleblower like Chelsea Manning, not a journalist and publisher like Assange, Julian Assange. They have fought for the people of the world. They put their lives on the line. They put the lives on the line for the people of the world to get the truth about what's going on. That's the reality. That's the reality that we are saying here in front of the Swedish consulate. So free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Chelsea Manning.
Free Chelsea Manning.
Put the Swedish government on trial.
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 Okay. So we're here today in front of the Swedish consulate to demand that they drop the charges and investigation of Julian Assange. We're here today to say that if there were criminals that need to be investigated, we should investigate the Swedish war criminals that have been supplying weapons to governments around the world that have been massacring people, that have been killing people around the world. They've been profiteering off of illegal arms sales around the world to kill people. They were involved in supplying weapons to the Saudi Arabia government, which were used in bombing people in Yemen. So if you want to look at war crimes, look at the Swedish government for what they have done. And yet they spent millions of dollars, they spent tremendous resources on trying to prosecute and extradite Julian Assange. And why? Because they're in collusion with the United States government, because they're part of the war crimes. And we're saying they have to be held accountable today. And the Swedish government talks about freedom and democracy, and yet they're profiteering from war. They're profiteering from selling weapons. I say that's duplicity, it's hypocrisy, they need to be prosecuted.
You're right.
Any other speakers? Okay, we'll do a couple more chants and then we'll organize to take this forward on June the 12th. We're going to be meeting again, we're going to be rallying again in front of the Federal Building, 90 7th Street in San Francisco. That's the day that the United States government is going to have a trial. Just leave it. Is going to have a trial or a hearing in London demanding that they extradite Julian Assange. And we're saying that we have to be there. We have to have hundreds of people there to demand hands off Julian Assange, hands off Chelsea Manning, and put the real war criminals on trial. That's why we're going to be there on June the 12th. So get the word out. Let's let people know. Federal Building is on 97th Street near 7th and Mission. That's where the Federal Building is. And, you know, it's also Nancy Pelosi's office, that great leader of the Democratic Party who can't say one word about Julian Assange because she supports his extradition. This is Nancy Pelosi, the, quote, liberal in San Francisco, the liberal. Actually, she is a war criminal. She's voted for these funds. She's voted for these war funds that the United States is spending. So while they complain about Trump, they continue to vote for war funds. They continue to say that we should spend more money in the United States for war. What kind of insanity is that? With the people who are dying in the street, the people that can't get health care, the students that have to live in their cars because they're in debt $100,000 or more for funds. I mean, what kind of insanity is that? That's the insanity, really, of capitalism. That's the insanity of imperialism that spends trillions for war, but people in this country are dying because they don't have health care. People in this country cannot go to college because they're charging thousands of dollars. That's the contradiction of capitalism and imperialism that we have in this country. And the U.S. government now wants to cover up the war crimes that were exposed by WikiLeaks, that were exposed by Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, and they want to shut him down because he's telling the truth. That's the only reason they want to shut him down. Is he a war criminal? Hell no. He exposed the crimes of war criminals. That's the reality. That's why we're here in the Swedish consulate to say, put the real war criminals, the people in your government and the armaments industry, the officials, the executives who profited off of selling war, equipment illegally to kill people around the world. These are the people.
Also, the Swedish government stopped a 9-year investigation that did nothing.
Yeah, that's right. They've spent millions of dollars in a 9-year investigation of Julian Assange. What have they proved? What have they got?
Nothing.
You know, nothing. So it's a fraud. It's from beginning to end. It's a frame-up from beginning to end. It's a frame-up against the people of the world for trying to shut Julian Assange down, because the attack on Julian Assange is an attack on the people of the world. It's an attack on the people of the world who have a right to know what these crimes are. People have a right to know what our government is doing, and they don't like it when these crimes are exposed. They're angry. The government is angry when these crimes are exposed. How dare you find out about what we have been doing with your money? That's what this government says. I mean, the Swedish government and the Swedish people need to call the Swedish government to account. They need to be held accountable. And there needs to be prosecution of the war criminals in Sweden who have been selling weapons illegally to governments around the world who've been massacring and killing people, murdering people. And we need to get the labor movement, we need to get the Journalists Union in the United States, the Newspaper Guild, to demand freedom for Julian Assange. All journalists are under a threat. All journalists, freelance and even professional journalists at newspapers are under threat because of, and the New York Times, even Rachel Maddow is saying she's worried. And these people are the ones that have been calling for Julian Assange to be extradited. All of a sudden their tune has changed. Why is that? Because they are now worried about their own behind,
Well,
their
I
own
think-
mess.
I think they give lip service.
Well, the fact is,
I think they give lip service because they're towing the line. They've been towing the line ever since, including Rachel Maddow. They have to say something and critique, but they should really stand up and start publishing a lot of these things like they did during the Pentagon Papers in the 1970s when the people were protesting in the streets massively and the Washington Post and New York Times published what the Supreme Court had ruled was illegal. They had no choice because the people made it happen. It's the people that are going to make it happen. To free Julian Assange, to end the U.S. wars, to free Chelsea Manning. It's up to us. Thank you for being here.
Let them go. People have a right to know.
Assange Manning, let them go.
people have a right to know. Assange Manning, let them go. People have a right to know. Assange Manning, let them go. People have a right to know. Assange Manning, let them go. People have a right to know. Assange Manning, let them go. People have a right to know. Assange Manning, let them go. People have a right to know. Manning, let them go. People have a right to know. Okay, brothers and sisters, if no one else has anything to say, we'll reconvene on June the 12th, continue the fight. We are not going to let our voices not be heard.
Yeah, because it's hard in the middle of the day. It's important in the middle of the day, but a lot of people go to work.
Well, it'll be going on till 6 o'clock. Okay. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. Sorry I was so late.
That's okay.
Hi, bye, everybody. See you all. See you soon.
Do what?
I get so nervous. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. It's true.
Can we take a picture before we go? I've got this banner that
I'll
says
take a few, but let's do that.
we love Wiki.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Wiki.
Yeah, I'll take the picture. How's that?
Yeah. Steve, can you hold this?